What makes an Australian car truly Australian? It's not just the badge or where it was assembled. It's the heart of the machine. That beating heart is the engine. And over decades, Australian engineers have created some incredible power plants that change the automotive landscape forever. Today, we're counting down the 7 most innovative engines ever to power Australian cars. These aren't just powerful motors. They're game changers that pushed boundaries, solved problems, and sometimes even rewrote the rules of automotive engineering. Australian innovation has always punched above its weight, but nowhere is this more true than in our automotive history. From the golden era of local manufacturing to modern engineering marvels, these engines tell the story of Australian ingenuity. The engines on this list weren't just copied from overseas designs. Each one represents Australian problem-solving at its finest. Whether adapting to our unique conditions, meeting specific performance goals, or simply doing more with less. 7. Ford Barra Turbo 6. The Barra engine might be the most underrated Australian engine ever made. Developed for the BA Falcon in 2002, this 4.0-liter inline-six was designed and built in Geelong, Victoria. What made the Barra special wasn't just its robust design. It was the first mass-produced Australian engine to feature both variable cam timing and turbocharging from the factory. The standard turbo models produced 240 kilowatts of power, but the engine's true genius was in its potential. The Barra block was so overbuilt that it could handle massive power increases with minimal modifications. Today, modified Barra engines regularly produce over 1,000 horsepower while maintaining reliability, a testament to the engineering quality from Ford Australia. The engine's design incorporated a single overhead camshaft, cross-flow aluminum head, and sequential fuel injection. In its final form, in the FGX Falcon, the turbo version produced 270 kilowatts, making it the most powerful 6-cylinder engine ever mass-produced in Australia. When Ford closed their Australian manufacturing operations in 2016, the Barra's production ended. But its legacy lives on in thousands of modified cars and as the power plant of choice for many custom builds across the country. 6. Holden 308 V8. Known to enthusiasts as the 5-liter, Holden's 308 cubic inch V8 defined Australian muscle for generations. First introduced in 1969, the 308 wasn't just an American design transplanted to Australia, it was specifically adapted for local conditions. Unlike its American cousins, the Australian 308 featured unique cylinder heads, intake manifolds, and camshaft profiles designed for our driving conditions and fuel quality. Early versions produced around 186 kilowatts, modest by today's standards, but substantial for the era. What made the 308 truly innovative was its longevity and adaptability. Over its 30-year production run, Holden engineers continuously refined the design. It transitioned from carburetors to electronic fuel injection, gained computer-controlled engine management, and even adopted sequential injection in later models. The pinnacle came with the VL Group A, SS, and HSV models, where the stroked 304 version, technically 5.7 liters, produced over 200 kilowatts of power. These engines featured special cylinder heads, roller rockers, and unique intake systems developed by Holden's Performance Division. The 308's production finally ended in 1999, but not before establishing itself as the sound of Australian performance. Its distinctive rumble still turns heads at car shows across the nation. 5th Leyland Rover E-Series. Sometimes innovation comes from solving difficult problems. When Leyland Australia needed an engine for for the P76 sedan, in the early 1970s, they created something remarkable, the aluminum E-Series Vive 8. In an era when most V8 engines were iron blocks weighing hundreds of kilograms, Leyland produced an all-aluminum 4.4-liter V8 that weighed just 200 kilograms. This was revolutionary for the time, especially from a smaller manufacturer. The E-Series featured overhead camshafts, unusual for a V8 of that era, hemispherical combustion chambers, and an advanced for its time electronic ignition system. It produced 143 kilowatts and 380 Newton meters of torque. Impressive figures for 1973. Unfortunately, the P76's short production life meant few of these innovative engines were built. The Leyland factory at Zetland closed in 1974 after producing around 18,000 P76 models, with only a fraction featuring the aluminum V8. Despite its brief existence, the E-Series showed that Australian engineers could create world-class engines when given the opportunity. Today, surviving examples are prized by collectors who recognize the technical achievement they represent. 4. Ford XR6 Turbo Barra FPV-F6. While we've already mentioned the Barra engine, the FPV-F6 variant deserves its own entry. When Ford Performance Vehicles needed something to compete with HSV's V8s in the early 2000s, they created what many consider the finest Australian performance engine ever made. The F6 Typhoon and later F6 models featured a heavily modified version of the Barra turbo engine. In its ultimate FGX form, it produced 310 kilowatts and 565 Newton meters of torque, more than many V8s of the era, while maintaining better fuel economy. What made this engine truly special was its character. Unlike peaky turbocharged engines, the FPV version delivered enormous torque from just above idle speed. The engine featured a strengthened block, forged connecting rods, unique pistons, and an advanced intercooler system. Perhaps most impressively, Ford Australia developed this engine with a fraction of the budget of overseas performance divisions. The result was an engine that could compete with, and often beat, far more expensive European performance sedans. The F6's production ended alongside other Australian Fords in 2016, but many consider it the high water mark of Australian performance engineering, proof that sometimes 6 cylinders are better than 8. Third Holden 253 V8. When fuel prices spiked during the 1970s oil crisis, Holden faced a dilemma. They needed V8 power, but with better fuel economy. Their solution was the innovative 253 cubic inch 4.2-liter V8, the smallest V8 mass-produced in Australia. What made the 253rd remarkable wasn't its size alone. Holden engineers designed it alongside the larger 308, creating an engine family that shared many components, but with different bore dimensions. This manufacturing efficiency was years ahead of its time. The 253rd featured thin wall casting technology, allowing for a lighter block without sacrificing strength. At just 188 kilograms, it was one of the lightest V8s in production anywhere in the world at the time. Despite its modest displacement, the engine produced 138 kilowatts and 355 Newton meters of torque in its most powerful form. More importantly, it delivered V8 character with fuel consumption closer to a 6-cylinder, exactly what Australian drivers needed during fuel shortages. Production of the 253 continued until 1984, when emissions regulations and changing market demands favored fuel injection technology. But its legacy of efficient performance influenced Australian engine design for decades afterward. 2. Holden Ecotec 5.6. As Australia entered the 1990s, emissions regulations and fuel efficiency demands created new engineering challenges. Holden's answer was the revolutionary Ecotec 5.6, first introduced in the 1995 VS Commodore. The Ecotec wasn't just an updated version of the previous Buick-derived V6. It featured all-new cylinder heads with 4 valves per cylinder, dual overhead camshafts, and sequential fuel injection. Technologies that were cutting-edge for a mass-market Australian car of the era. What made the engine truly innovative was its emissions control system. It included 3 catalytic converters, heated oxygen sensors, and one of the most advanced engine management computers fitted to an Australian car at that time. The result was 147 kilowatts of power, improved fuel economy, and emissions that comfortably met the new standards. Later supercharged versions and HSV models produced up to 245 kilowatts, bringing V8-like performance to a V6 package. The Ecotec continued evolving through multiple generations of Commodores, eventually being replaced by the imported Alloytec V6 in 2004. During its production, it demonstrated that Australian engineering could meet global environmental standards while maintaining the performance Australians expected. 1. Repco Brabham Formula 1 V8. At the pinnacle of Australian engine innovation stands the Repco Brabham V8. While not fitted to production cars, this engine represents the highest achievement of Australian motor engineering, powering Jack Brabham to the 1966 Formula 1 World Championship. Designed and built in Melbourne by Repco, this 3.0-liter V8 was based on an aluminum Oldsmobile block, but extensively modified with Australian-designed cylinder heads, crankshaft, connecting rods, and valve train components. What made this engine revolutionary was its lightweight design and reliability. While competitors like Ferrari used complex 12-cylinder engines, the Repco 5.8 was simpler but extraordinarily dependable. It produced around 232 kilowatts, less than some rivals, but enough to win when paired with the Brabham's superior chassis and handling. The 1966 championship made Jack Brabham the only driver in history to win the Formula 1 title in a car bearing his own name and powered by an Australian engine. The following year, Denny Hume won another championship in a Repco-powered Brabham. These victories against much larger European manufacturers represent perhaps the greatest David versus Goliath story in Australian motorsport history. The Repco Brabham engine proved Australian ingenuity could compete with anyone on the world stage. From the grassroots innovation of local manufacturing to the pinnacle of global motorsport, Australian-designed engines have left an indelible mark on automotive history. Though local production has ended, the legacy of these innovative power plants continues in the DNA of modern vehicles and in the garages of enthusiasts nationwide. These 7 engines did more than move metal. They moved the entire industry forward, solving problems and setting standards that influenced automotive design worldwide. In their pistons, valves, and camshafts lies the story of Australian innovation itself. Practical, resourceful, and always punching above its weight.